So this is the postcard that cost me less than 60 cents to send, and these are the numbers that came back, or a few of the numbers that came back. My name is Preston. I've been in Landspace since about 2021. This postcard is really what started me on my journey and exactly what I used when I was just getting started. And today I'm breaking down every decision that I made with this particular mailer so you can copy it and kind of, start your journey as well. So let's jump right into it. So the core misconception, right? There's a few core misconceptions that I normally see. One of them being that direct mail is dead. Two being that it's too expensive, and three that you need a big budget. And that's exactly wrong. And the people normally saying that are who are or who have never really actually sent an official mailer and or are not consistent with their mailing, or they never tracked and actually saw what actually came back and what the numbers actually look like. And the actual reason most beginners, to be honest with you, never send mail isn't because it doesn't work, is that they overthink it. A lot of times they spend weeks on ends or months on end trying to design the perfect mailer, thinking that if I add this particular font or this particular color, that it will result in a higher return on their investment or just a higher return from their mailer. And more than likely, that's not the case. Consistency is extremely important when it comes to mailing. The design of it doesn't necessarily matter too much. Of course, a nice design mailer will communicate professionalism or that you are a bit more experienced or a bit more seasoned. But to be honest with you, nothing beats consistency. So let's jump right into what people think versus what actually works. So as we mentioned before, people often think that the direct mail is dead. And the reason I keep touching on direct mailing because this is the marketing that we use with our first mailer. And since we have progressed since this initial mailing, we have became a bit more strategic in the way that we approach it. But just for this example today, I will cover what we use with that initial mailing. All right. So they either say that it's dead, they may say that it's expensive, they may say that it's complicated, it may say that it needs to let's say look professional. I would say that's the biggest gripe or what I typically see when people and that's typically what I see when people have their initial thoughts about what works within direct mailing. But what actually works, right? And this is the most important part. And the way I approach it is the analogy that I typically use is very similar to fishing, right? So if you know anything about fishing, myself, I do use a lot of lures. So I typically approach the direct mail, just a lot of my marketing efforts the same way. So let's say we have a fish, right? Let me see if I can draw that fish. That's a horrible looking fish. Let's try. We can do that a little bit better. All right. So let's say we have a fish, right? And this fish is the seller, right? And then on the other end we have you, right? This is you, right? And you are the land investor. So what you need to do, or at least keep in mind, is that every seller is not the same, right? Every seller has different reasons to sell the property. They have different timelines. They have different knowledge base. It's about four, maybe five different seller profiles that they can fit into. But typically, requires, each one requires a different way to go about marketing, right? So let's say this is you, and let's say this is your fishing rod. So let's say you have, let's see, 4 or 5 different lures, right? So let's say with this lure, this is for your sellers who require speed, right? And then with this one, let's say this is a seller that requires that there may be a mixture, right? There may be a mixture with this one, right? They may require speed, but they also want a decent price. And that's another thing too, is that the seller isn't wrong for wanting a fair market value for their property, right? There's nothing wrong with that, right? I guess how can I say your objective as a seller is to, or excuse me, as a buyer or a land investor is really to bring as much value to that transaction as possible, right? And then as a byproduct of that, you'll be compensated. But the goal is to bring as much value. So I say that to go back to our initial point. So you have speed, you have mixture. Let's say a mixture may be somebody who would want a higher price, closer to fair market value, or somebody who would want a quicker closing, right? So I would say speedy closing is anything under, let's say, 10 days. A mixture may be, let's say, 2 to 3 months, up to 4 months. And then we also have somebody who wants full market value. These are three different profiles, right? Full market. These are three different profiles, customer or seller profiles. They require three different lures, if you will, or three different approaches. So that's something to keep in mind. So with this particular mailer, this was aimed more towards the speed and a mixture, right? But the reason we sent a postcard, and we always send out these filler postcards when we're starting out in mailing, because you can do as much research. You can do a lot of research within a particular market, right? But you never really know exactly the type of seller you are going to be hitting, right? So how we typically operate is that we send out the filler postcards just to get an idea. And this is one thing that's really important for beginners too, is that a lot of investors are not comfortable with talking on the phone. A lot of investors are not comfortable with dealing with rejection. That's something that you have to get extremely comfortable with, and I can't emphasize that enough. You have to get really comfortable with rejection because it would allow you to have those uncomfortable conversations with the sellers, right? For the most part, a lot of salespeople they have it's like a stigma attached to them, right? Where it's like you're the crummy auto salesman, right? Used car salesman is what they call it, right? So out the gate, you're behind the eight ball. Out the gate, they're thinking that you're just trying to scam or trying to steal their property for whatever reason. So when you approach it, you really have to be strategic in the type of mailer that you send, but also that initial conversation and the comfortability that you are using when you're speaking with the seller too. So, all right, so yeah, what actually works, right? So let's double back and let's go back to why we chose that postcard, right? I did mention the reason we chose that postcard because when we were beginning, we were a few things, right? We weren't really comfortable with talking on the phone, and two, we didn't really know what to expect. And the postcard solved both of those things, right? It allowed us to get our reps in as far as talking on the phone, and allow us to start filling out the client profile or the seller profile to understand what type of sellers we're dealing with, what are their pain points, what value would they like us to bring, right? Because at the end of the day, you're trying to bring as much value as possible. So that was one of the things that we had to keep in mind. So that's the reason why we chose a postcard. How we pulled the list, there's a few different data centers you can pull from. The one that we used was DataTree, and the market that we targeted, let's see if we can, let's see. So the market that we targeted, let me bring this over for you, MP. So this is one of the maps that we use. This is a more recent map, so this isn't necessarily what we were using when we initially started, but we hit, it was three different counties. So it was like Randolph County, David County, and I can't really remember the third county, but it was all within this vicinity. It might have been Cumberland County out here in North Carolina. And we take the same approach whether we do, in Tennessee, South Carolina, you mainly, focus the southeastern region, but we nationwide as well. So that's the that we targeted. And what a normal conversion rate looks like for us is anywhere from like 1 to 3%. So for this particular mailer, let's go back. So I think we sent out around 4,000 pieces for this mailer, and I think like a 1% conversion rate for this. So that would give us about, I would maybe, let's see, so we did 4,000, we sent at 60 cent. All right, so we sent at a 60-cent mailer. So we would, this was about maybe 40 points of, or like, that we received from this mailer right here. Now, out of this 40, we only really end up purchasing about 45 properties, right? Because out of this 40, we had people telling us to fuck off. We had people telling us they're not interested. We had wanting market price, full market value, And in future videos, I'll tell you how we kind of like circumvent or can bring more value to the client with those type of sellers. But we have people who are not interested. So at the end, and we also had a lot of properties of sellers who were interested, but for whatever reason, um, we weren't in purchasing the property or didn't really fit our portfolio, right? So there may be properties that are maybe in a flood zone, properties that may have zoning issues, which isn't that big of a deal, but properties that have been landlocked and may require a little bit more work, something that we weren't willing to work with at that particular time, or properties that were just a bit smaller than what wanted. So out of these 40 responses, we actually end up closing about 4 to really good pieces of property um, that we either flip or do some type of value add to the property. Um, so yeah, we do once we actually got these responses, like approach it, right? So we did mention what our offer was, and here's another thing I wanted to touch on as well. Um, so a lot of um, I was land sellers, they really go about I want to say a lot, but it is quite common that they go through a guru or whatever. And the common census is that you pay maybe 30 or 40 cents on the dollar or whatnot. I don't necessarily agree with that, but you have to understand that every seller is different, and you really have to be. So what that looked like, right? So we just on what we offered. We touched on what they accepted. Um, so we need to touch on how long the first call to sign contract. So with this particular mailer, I think we closed on the majority of properties. I think out of the 5 were closed within about a month. And then the other 2 properties we closed on within about maybe a month and a half, 2 months. They had a few issues that we need to kind of nail. I think one of them had a title issue and whatnot. So um, yeah, so was our first Mueller, and that will pretty much cover it we talked about today. But until next time, make sure you subscribe for more land flipping, lifestyle, and boring business breakdowns. Y'all take it easy. Peace.